All right, welcome to another Myers-Briggs Type Interaction. This one's between myself and ISTP. I'm Selbach, and I'm here with Teddy. Oh shoot, I forgot to write down the.
No one's ever going to be able to remember the numbers ever. But officially, it's 564,339.
Okay, good. Thanks for getting that. Okay, so you're ISFJ, right?
Yep.
Okay. So just to get us started, why don't you just give your brief story of how you got into Myers-Briggs and discovered that you're ISFJ?
Yeah, I talked about it a little bit during my last video I did with Pneumoceptor, but for me, it was pretty simple for the most part. I had heard about the Myers-Briggs and just different little places, like online. Every now and then somebody would show me something with it, or it may have popped up in different little interactions in my daily life. But it was about 3 years ago that I looked at one quiz, or I took like one test on it just online, and I really do think it was through Facebook. I think one of my friends just pointed it out to me or sent it to me, and I did it, and just for whatever reason, that one time when I did it, the description of the ISFJ one, because I did get ISFJ, it really stuck out to me a whole lot, and it felt extremely accurate. And I think it just explains a lot to me because I felt so different than a lot of people I had known. And so after that, I kind of looked into it some more. I read about it online a little bit. I bought a couple of books on it, and they really were pretty enlightening about the whole thing. And it took about a year after I found out about it before I found a Personality Cafe, and I've been on there for about 2 years now. So it's really that simple. I was telling Pneumocept in our last chat, I've never been anything else. I've never tested as any other type officially. Like maybe every now and then one test might pop me out as another type, but I've never really felt like I'm anything else.
Okay. So, like, I mean, did you go through any sort of process to kind of like confirm your suspicions, or is just like you just like instantly knew your ISFJ?
Not officially. I mean, I kind of everything I kept looking at just kept kind of confirming it more and more. Like, at first maybe I wasn't 100% sure, but anytime I read another type description, none of them felt as accurate for me. When I bought the books I talked about, I would always go to the ISFJ section first to read it, and then I'd be like, wow, this is fitting me perfectly too. So yeah, it wasn't any really strong confusion there. I mentioned in the last one, ISFJs and ISTJs are so similar that maybe I kind of considered ISTJ for a while, but it never really felt right. I always felt like I was more of a feeler.
Okay. And I remember you mentioned in your last talk with Pneumoceptor, you were saying that you kind of felt different as an ISFJ male,
Yeah.
and that learning your ISFJ kind of explained like a lot of your differences.
Yeah.
What were some of the differences, or some ways you kind of like felt there was something going on?
Well, here's what I think is funny about the whole thing. I was thinking about this. Is in the SJ aspect, I don't think I ever did feel that weird with those two preferences, which I think makes a lot of sense from what you hear when you talk to other people. Not that SJs are necessarily the norm, but most people feel like they are. Definitely that S's are in the majority compared to N's, and in a lot of places I've read that there are more SJs than SPs. Who knows if that's exactly true or not, but I think it makes sense that those two parts never really I didn't even really think about those very much. But the other two, I felt really very strongly. And that makes sense because from what I've read, introverts are in the minority. And with males, I've read that feelers are in the minority. So I think those are the two areas that really stuck out a whole lot to me, especially introversion. I think that's what really hooked me into this whole thing more than anything else, is I always felt weird being an introvert until I read about the Myers-Briggs. And when I read that and realized it's not weird for me to want to need to spend a lot of time by myself to recharge from social interaction. I was like, okay, wow, this makes a whole lot of sense. That explains why all these other people feel so social and so excited and always want to do things. I'm like, I just want to back up sometimes and just chill out on my own. Um,
Yeah.
so that part probably wasn't like a male versus female thing. But I definitely think being a feeler And being a male, it's hard to say how many people in my life, how many of the males are really thinkers and how many are feelers, but it feels like a lot of them are thinkers. And I don't know. It's hard to tell sometimes, what is the true difference between a feeler and a thinker, because you don't want to say it's down to emotions, but
Yeah, it's
I do think, not that I don't use logic, because I use logic a lot, but I think my first instinct a lot of times in a situation is to think about how people are affected by it. I think about how, if this happens, how is it going to affect all these different people? That's usually my first instinct before I think about, well, does it have to be done this way or this way?
yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And a lot of people have that misconception that that thinker versus feeler. Like feeler means you're like in touch with your emotions, or that you base all your decisions on your emotions. And people kind of they take a Myers-Briggs test and they avoid all those feeler answers. And especially guys, a lot of
Yeah,
guys will mistype as thinkers when all it is they place a high value on other people, and
right.
which is a good quality for anybody, whether you're male or female.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think that's tricky too because I think both thinkers and feelers tend to do that in their own ways. Just like feelers will make decisions logically too, and
yeah,
and thinkers like some of the I don't want to say nicest because they are the nicest people, but some of the most like emotionally in touch with themselves people I know have been thinkers. It's not it's like you said, it's not a definite thing where one person like if you're a thinker or a feeler, you only do one thing. Everybody does both to some degree.
okay, yeah. Um, let's see, I'm trying to think where was I going with this? Um, but then okay, so and you're talking earlier about SJs, and I think I tend to agree that it seems, I'm not sure statistically, like what the statistics are. I think it is more common. It's not necessarily that they're like a majority, but SJs, I do think SJs are more common than SPs, and to the extent that uh, I've always had a sense that society, at least the way I grew up, um, placed a high value on the things that SJs value. Um, and I might, I've mentioned in like a couple of my other videos that's kind of why I mistyped as ISTJ for,
Yeah, I remember that.
and so yeah, that totally makes that makes sense to me that you've always identified with the SJ, and you never really had a problem with with identifying with that. But yeah, identifying as an introvert, that's definitely something that a lot of people, that grabs a lot of people when they realize that they're an introvert, and it kind of explains things. Um, so the feeler versus thinker. I mean, like, what? I guess my question is like, um, what was your initial reaction when you first realized your ISFJ, or specifically the feeler aspect? Um, I mean, did it just sort of make you like more like more confident about your own values, or was it kind of like a gradual process?
Oh no, I mean almost immediately. Well, probably within the first couple of months of learning about the Myers Briggs, yeah, it made me feel a whole lot better about the whole thing. I still remember that. Yeah, 'cause I felt so weird just being so sensitive, and I don't. Again, I don't want to say that feelers are automatically sensitive, but I definitely think I've always felt like I'm a lot more sensitive, both in terms of my own emotions and other people's emotions, in a lot of situations than probably most males that I know, or at least from what I see from them. Maybe I don't see every aspect of it, but yeah, it's always felt like that. It's always felt like I'm affected very easily by things people say, and it makes me, along especially because I am an SJ, it makes me very guarded sometimes with what I say to and about other people. Because sometimes I'll be afraid that something I'll say could be misconstrued, or it might hurt somebody's feelings in a way that I wouldn't be ready for. So it does make me kind of cautious about what I say a lot of times.
Yeah. It's interesting though because as an ISTP, I have FE as my fourth function. So I mean, I can. I mean, it's always kind of been in the back of my mind, like, you have to consider, consider other people. I mean, it's something I've always been taught, and so I guess I kind of always seen it as like kind of a given, and something that I guess I never really saw it as something that would naturally occur to people. I mean, it's like it's something that I had to be taught how to do.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, like I've gone through my own journey as far as like being able to use FE properly. As an inferior function, it's you know, well, they say people tend to develop their inferior functions later in life, like midlife, and and all this stuff about like being in the grip of your inferior function.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Being under stress. So yeah, I think like I was recently saying, it'd be kind of good for me to observe other FE users, just to, and that that would be kind of a natural way to develop the inferior. I've heard that theory in general, that a good way to develop your lower functions, your third and fourth function, is to just to observe and hang out with people who use those as their primary functions. But yeah, I don't even know where I'm going with that either. But one thing that I found really interesting about you in particular was like our conversations on the forum. Like especially like you bring up those. I think they're from that Kersey book.
Yeah.
Those examples of like the tortoise and the hare, and the
Yeah.
grasshopper and ant.
Yeah.
And I found those really interesting, because it's like I've never heard like a different take on those childhood stories.
Yeah, and that's something I thought we might talk about a little bit, because that's I think a really interesting dynamic that I don't think it's been talked about in a whole lot of detail in any of these videos. Because usually it's funny. I think on the site that there's so many intuitives on the site that I think there's a lot of big focus sometimes on how N's are different than S's, and I think S's sometimes do get grouped a whole lot together. I remember in one of the chats, the user Fat Bozo, he was saying the same thing. I thought that he made a really good point with that, that a lot of times all the S's are kind of put together. And I think there's a huge dichotomy between SJs and SPs. And I think for you, it actually makes a whole lot of sense that those things that I read kind of spoke to you, because I remember hearing in your chats, you talked about how your parents had a big impact on you, with them being, at least I know at least your mom was an SJ, and how you were kind of raised with those kind of SJ values. And so I think seeing that as an SP, you kind of had your own set of values, your own needs that are different than those. I think it kind of made sense that you could relate to those stories, because I think it's probably something that's been true throughout history. That's what I think is really interesting about it. I think it's not just something that's in our current society. I really do think that this SJ versus SP, two different mentalities, has been going on forever. At least, well, as long as we've been at the point where we've actually had type. But and it's interesting, because I think a lot of times you see it more where the SJ is the person in authority, and the SP is the one that, for whatever situation, whether it's parent child, or boss employee, or student teacher, there's definitely almost like a battle going on because it's, I think for an SJ, when they're in that kind of authority position, they definitely feel the need to kind of set a certain amount of structure. And I think that was just a really huge enlightening point for me, is when I read about SPs, that realizing that they can thrive without that structure, and may actually thrive a lot better without it. And that the structure hurts them in a lot of ways almost more than it helps. And I think that's a really huge point that I learned upon first reading about it a lot.
Yeah, and you mentioned that point about people on their deathbed will never think like, oh, I wish I'd worked harder, or I wish I'd been more structured in my life.
Yeah.
Girls wishing they'd taken more time to just to enjoy the moment, live for the moment.
Oh yeah, no, I mean definitely, and I don't want to oversimplify it as saying that SJs represent work and SPs represent play
Oh
because
yeah,
everybody is going to have to work at some point, and everybody needs time to enjoy themselves. But I think one thing when I talked to my mom about this, she's an ISTJ, and there's one of our family friends that she does a lot of work with, and he's an ISFP. And she really found the whole when I explained the SJSP thing to her, she really found it like extremely interesting because it fit with her in the aspect. I think what she always said that really stuck out to me is that one difference between J's and P's in general, when you talk about structure, a lot of it has to do with time, not necessarily physical organization. It could be, but not always. But in terms of time, J's and P's look at things very differently. And that's the way I kind of look at it with like work versus play. For me, it's very hard to enjoy myself when I still have work to do. I will procrastinate, but only to a certain degree. I really can almost only focus on the one thing at a time. Like I really want to say, okay, I'm going to do all this work. I'm going to suffer through it. I'm going to get it done, and it's going to be over with. Then I'm going to focus on my playtime, and I'm going to enjoy myself and do whatever I want and not even think about work. Whereas I noticed with a number of people, they don't function like that. They want to do both at the same time. They want to play as they work, and they can go back and forth between the two so quickly. And I don't want to jump and say that's definitely an SP thing, but it seems like SPs are really good at going back and forth, a lot more so than me.
yeah. And see, that's the thing. What you were saying about having, if there's work to be done, you can't enjoy yourself. Well, that's how I was taught to
Yeah.
operate. Like
Yeah.
if there's work to be done, do that first, and then you can reward yourself by having playtime. And that that's the thing. I was never taught how to how to be anything else, and yet my natural tendency was to want to do both at the same time, and go back and forth. But I didn't have like the training or the just the ability or the knowledge of how to do that, and still get the work done that needed to be done. And so I would just have a tendency to just procrastinate, put off things till the last minute, and oftentimes not even get things done or not complete things in time, and suffered in college because of that, and because I didn't have I was living in the dorms or in apartments. I was away from my parents, and so I didn't have that that constant badgering, like get your homework done, study for this test.
Yeah.
And or just something to like remind me, like, oh yeah, you still have to do this thing, or you've been you've been playing this computer game for 2 hours now. And so that not having any good sort of SP role model, kind of it just kind of messed me up in certain ways where I wanted to do things my own way. Like I was happy to get away from my parents when I first started college, just because I didn't want I was just tired of living under their rules. But the thing is, like their rules were like the only thing I knew, and so like trying to be an SP without really knowing how to do it well, that kind of caused problems here. I mean, things worked out in the long run.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like just just this whole idea. Even after I started becoming independent, living on my own, I would still have like the SJ mentality telling me like, oh, you still have this work to be done. You have to like there's a bathroom that has to be cleaned, or the kitchen sink is piled up, or there's bills to be paid. And I would just be like, just really wanting to like just go see a movie or go for a drive or just go hang out with friends, and so I would actually go out and do stuff. But in the back of my mind, it's like just this, the SJ mindset is still nagging at me, thinking, oh, you still got stuff to do at home. You shouldn't be doing this. So, so it was like I've always had like this battle going on in my head between the way I was raised and the way my natural tendency is.
Yeah, and I find that really fascinating because that's something SPs are still so mysterious to me. There's so much that I don't really quite understand because I don't know how much of it is like down to type and how much of it's down to environment and how much of it is just down to them having to adapt to the structure in the world. It's really something I still don't quite understand is like how SPs balance all this out. And I've read some different things because I think what I've come to learn, and which has helped me out a whole lot with SPs, is understanding that they are, in general, so much better at adapting to things quickly than I am. Um, and I've read about how, and this is mainly from what I've read, I haven't really verified this with a lot of SPs I've talked to, but how even though maybe some of their, not procrastinating necessarily, but some of their kind of mixing the work and the play may get them into tight spots sometimes, how they're so much better than I would be about getting out of that tight spot. Like, and that's why I can't do that because if I were to put something off way too far, I would not be able to recover. I mean, I would just get so stressed out and get so just worried in the moment that it would just kind of collapse. and and I think for me that's why before learning about all of this, I used to think that everybody was like me in that regard. And to me, I was like, well, anybody that's going to put anything off, they must be just stupid because they're going to put themselves in this horrible position, and it's just going to be really bad. And if they like were to ask me advice, I would have tell them, no, go ahead and do your stuff, and they would have been able to avoid the whole thing. And it made me, I think before learning about all this, in some ways, I think maybe less sympathetic because I was like, well, if you had just done what I did, you would have been fine. But what I've learned, though, is that they have abilities in general that I wouldn't, that they would be able to do all this, just find their own way and adapt as they go along. And they'll be in just as good of a spot as I would have been, if not better, because maybe they would have had a much better time doing it. So it's really interesting. And I still don't really quite understand exactly how SPs function because it's just so foreign to me.
Yeah. And it's kind of foreign to me too because I've only known I was an ISTP for like 3 months now.
Okay.
So I'm still trying to get a grasp of what are my gifts? If I'm not good at at being structured and organized, and what can it? And so this I've come across just various J versus P, these little videos on YouTube or wherever, and just like you were saying, it's like they're really good at adapting, and that's only something I just come to realize about myself. Like, yeah, that's true. I do adapt to situations well. When unexpected changes come up, and I guess I've always kind of known that, but I never really saw it as um, a generally useful talent. It's more um, they say J's or SJs in particular are known for just doing things the way that they've always been done, or just going with whatever is known to work. And that's something that I've thought I related to, which is why, if that question came up on a personality test, I would answer that way, causing me to mistype again as ISTJ. But then, I look back and I think, well, there's a lot of situations where I had to adapt because what I was doing didn't work. But I would see that as an exception to the rule.
Mm.
Okay, I do whatever I know works until it doesn't work. But the reality is most of the things I do don't work, and so I've learned to adapt in those ways. But I mean, it is a good point that maybe it is just the way I do things. That is the SP way. Just going with the flow and just learning to adapt to new situations. I mean, I've been told recently, even that as an ISTP, that they people have seen me adapt well to situations like I was in a Skype chat about a month ago, and um, they're planning to record it for their personality type demonstration, and they told me like a few hours before the chat session, like they couldn't get the recording working, and so we were just gonna have like a really casual, just get to know each other Skype chat, and then like as soon as I logged on, they said, oh yeah, we can actually record this, and are you okay with that? And I'm like, oh okay, yeah, I can go with that. And I had to like adjust a few things, and just and but she was saying that you adapted really well. It was like a really good demonstration of the ISTP's gift. It was just like effortless for you just to say, okay, well, we got to change the plans. Let's just go with it. And I've also heard that perceivers in general are more able to do. They're more. I guess they're better at multitasking.
Yeah.
They have like a primary goal that they need to accomplish at the end of the day. Where the SJ would just do it as efficiently as possible, get everything done that they were planning to get done, whereas the SP would realize, oh, that there's I need to go grab a sandwich, or I'm oh, there's there's a friend who just called me. They have this problem that they need my help with, or just little things that come that service throughout the day that that other people might see as distractions, but they're things that will let's take advantage of the moment and accomplish all these other little things that I didn't even plan to get done at the beginning of the day. End of the day, that primary goal is still like I'm still like gonna do it at the last minute, and it might just kind of quickly get it done, but but I know that all those other things were just as important, even though I didn't know at the start of the day. This other thing that I planned, that I knew had to get done, well, I'm just gonna rush it at the last minute, but it's still gonna get done, and I can still feel good about everything I did that day, and that's a mindset that I'm still just kind of getting used to and trying to embrace.